Hello and welcome to the Elephant TV. My name is Abdullahi Boru and our guest today is Dalle Abraham. Dalle, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Dalle is a writer based in Marsabit, and today we will be talking about the conflict in Marsabit. Dalle, Marsabit has been in the headlines over the last few months, one could say even a year or two now. Could you explain the reasons behind the conflict in Marsabit, especially in the Sakuu area?
Abdul, I think the conflict in Marsabit has gone on longer than a year or two, and the media highlights is, while positive, narrows down whatever is happening in Marsabit to very simplistic notions of resource battles, resource conflicts, ethnic boundaries, and things like this, while still fine, misses the nuances within what's happening in Marsabit. So, but also it doesn't reflect entirely what is happening on the ground, because the extent of the displacement, the conflict is taking, the angle, the changes it's making has not been highlighted as is needed. Locally also, the media has played a bigger role in terms of, if you listen to local radio FMs, is when you get a clearer context of what is happening. So it's been blamed also in abetting and, fanning the conflict in Marsabit. So in the past 8 years, with devolution coming into Marsabit, the dynamics of the conflict has completely shifted to battling out of resources, like fighting over resources that are coming into the area. Over the past 8 years, close to 50 billion has come into Marsabit, and this has created an opportunity for politicians to polarize people, either on perceptions of biases or misplaced, skewed resource sharing. These are some of the animating factors. But if you look at generally the context of Marsabit and especially Sakuu Constituency, where the current conflict is really raging and has been going on for a long period of time, it's Marsabit is by far the largest county in Kenya. Vast spaces with very little infrastructure all over the place. But Sakuu Constituency is a microclimate, a very mountainous area with microclimate. Everyone wants a piece of it. So we see the conflict playing out. Sakuu Constituency boundaries is where much of the killings and the conflict is happening and playing out. So everyone wants a piece of Marsabit. This is one of the factors playing out. Land is projected as one of the issues. But if you look at the longer historical context within which this conflict is coming about, you see an emergence of a political elite, politicians who are overplaying, these perceptions of resources and land and fanning the conflict. So the past two general elections has really been very polarizing. The conflict in Marsabit plays out in different arenas. If you look at it in the deeper context, it's urbanized, plays out on the floor of parliament. The media is roped into this. Press statements are issued by politicians, and it's always like people crying, of being victims while also being perpetrators in the same circle of never-ending conflict. So the past 30 years has seen, if you look at keenly how boundaries have shifted over time, this is one of the key animating factors in Marsabit. So land, while being a factor, the political elites coming into the area, this is what is really animating. The 50 billion is what has serious material consequences on the ground. So where hospitals are built, where schools are being built, all this is defining, how people perceive governance, and it's raised the political stakes of these offices. So this is where the battle is really being fought.
Yeah. Thank you, Dalle. I think that seems like there are many moving pieces and threads, and devolution, which was meant to help, and it has helped in many ways, also plays a part. Some people have complained that the national government has not done enough to address insecurity. Like you mentioned, every once in a while, everybody wants to be seen as a victim. What role, if any, the national government has played in, helping to ease the insecurity in Marsabit?
Of course, the national government has become almost like the scapegoat in this, with legitimate concerns being raised. I mean, the national government hasn't done much, especially looking at the toll of this conflict. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Houses have been burned. There's been, people have been impoverished by cattle rustling, which is in the mix. But the national government's effort and reaction so far seems to be knee-jerk, reactionary, and unsustained. The efforts are uncoordinated. It's purely based on, when there are flare-ups is when they seem to provide, ceasefire interventions. But some of their larger efforts have also been very counterproductive. For example, the repossessing of Kenya Police Reserve guns, for example, has made, the entry of illegal arms really rampant. If you look at the geography, the landscape in Marsabit, it's policing the area has largely been, for a long time given back to the community through the Kenya Police Service. So they played a very crucial role in terms of protecting livestock, in manning all these very porous borders, but also providing security for their livestock. So when these KPR guns were removed, now entry of illegal arms came into the picture. So this has had a very counterproductive effect. Secondly, if you look at what's happening in Marsabit now, there are no serious conflict arbitration processes that have been set into motion. Of course, National Cohesion Integration Commission came into the area a year and a half ago slightly, met with community leaders, representatives, different sections of the community in Marsabit. But their intervention also is, one will say, is one looking for quick fixes. And it's not possible, especially looking at the dynamic, complex nature of the conflict in Marsabit. So these knee-jerk reactions from the national government is really not productive. In fact, it's the national government has been blamed of, at different times aiding or supporting a particular community. So this is where the problem is. National government coordination in terms of addressing the conflict is lacking. If you see the intelligence on the ground also, because this is really a planned conflict. You see the existence of militia groups, there are people funding them, we're providing them with meals and accommodation, and it's the gathering of this information hasn't seemed to be, coordinated in a good way, while also the efforts being put in place is not sustained. So this is where the national government is failing. It's really a problem that can be solved in a day, especially looking at it in the context of, so for example, the Laikipia conflict and how the national government reacted. That is lacking in Marsabit. And this is where the blame is coming in. So this is where the national government is being blamed. They could do way more. They could do way more, especially as we go into the electioneering period.
So especially when it comes to the governor's seat and the level of polarization that we've seen that has led to conflict, what are your senses in that regard?
The conflict in Marsabit is played out on the floor of parliament. Whoever controls whoever gets into these political offices gets to determine what plays on the ground here. So if you look at the past, governor for Marsabit is now the current treasury. I think the second or fourth most powerful man in the country. When he was appointed, the local politicians were in uproar, saying, this will create two centers of power. While one is at the national level, this one is controlling resources at the county level. This dynamics has been playing out, especially if you look at the reactions here. It's mostly the guy, the treasury minister, is being blamed by politicians within the county government of Marsabit for funding, for financing, and doing so much more. While these are allegations, we can't rule out the dynamics of resource control here. As we go into the electioneering period, we see the Gabra ruling the first 5 years. I mean, the past governor was a Gabra, the current one is a Borana. The conflict happening is between these two communities. And as we go forward, I think two things we need to look at. First, every every one of those perceptions that were played up have now kind of played out, and it's a mirage really. And I think a lot of people are not going to either participate in this politics in this election as much as they did in the previous ones, where we saw voters being transported from far off places like Kisumu, Nakuru, Nairobi, and all the surrounding places. If you look at voter registration within Marsabit now, I think the target was about 20,000 new voters, but it's only by last week, I think it was about 4,000 who were registered. This is compounded further by climate, the farming that is raging now. So I feel like while the arms is really worrying, the number of people who've run away from Marsabit is really worrying. A lot of people are still displaced. They've lost their livelihoods. They're not in their homes. This is really worrying. And I think as we go into the electioneering period, it can only be played up in one sense. So security and also the lackluster way the national government has reacted so far is worrying. All these dynamics play into each other.
Are there any lessons that can be drawn from previous, mediation processes? And then like in the 90s, there were tension between communities that were resolved somehow. And those communities actually, if you speak about election now, during the last election, they worked together. The governor and the deputy do not come from the same community. Are there lessons like from the past that can be drawn that can apply to this conflict?
I think much more than intervention from outside, what has worked in Marsabit is internal, the organization, the alliances that are formed. These are the things that I think have contributed largely to being to peace coming about. If you look at the 2013 general election in Moyale and the large, the post-election violence there, and it's very disastrous aftermath. The community in Moyale came together, formed committees of peace, and that's how they forged the long-lasting peace that is now being experienced in sections like Moyale. While here in Marsabit, around Sakuu, these efforts have really not been given importance by the local leadership, but also by the community. It looks like half-hearted interventions, if there are any. So much more than national government interventions, it's the local grassroots movements that can really bring peace. So Marsabit Interfaith Council, which is a caucus of religious institutions, including sheikhs and pastors and bishops in the churches, coming together, preaching peace. That one is a good effort, but it's been sullied, and they've, I think, also raised their hands in despair. So we look to these kind of bodies to emerge, some very organic, grassroots-based conflict resolution process that can assist in this.
How has this institution been part of the problem or even part of the solution?
For a long time, it's the traditional council of elders who held a lot of sway in the area. So with the entry of a lot of, huge sums of money, the billions through devolution, these politicians have really wreaked havoc on the traditional institutions of governance and cultural institutions. I mean, Northern Kenya is the heart of negotiated democracy. What that means is that these elders have fallen in the clutch of this political elite. And there's an elite capture that is playing out. This has really affected how the elders participate in the conflict arbitration processes. One other important thing that we need to see is also the invention of other parallel council of elders by this political class. These ones are really not into anything to do with rangeland management, establishing of peace between communities. They are really stooges of these political elites. And that is where the problem is coming in. We've had very little effort so far from this class of people, this council of elders. And there are other activities of endorsing these politicians over the other. This is what is really animating. But if you look at where the problem in Marsabit right now is, it's with regards to this conflict. They are very silent about this, but very loud about the political endorsements. So this is where there's a problem.
What role, particularly has the media played? I would really want you to unpack for us, not just what is playing at the local level with vernacular radio stations, but also at the national stage with the mainstream national media. What I see a lot of the time is whenever something happens, politicians, most and sometimes even council of elders, addressing the media, they say one thing in formal English and Swahili space. But if you follow the same politicians, when they come to the local radio stations, they use a different language. You also see it on social media platforms, particularly among the younger generation, where this also plays up. Would you kindly, break it down for us in that regard, the role of the media, both national and the traditional national and local radio station, as well as the social media spaces?
The media is a critical player, a critical component in how this conflict has developed. The media so far at the national level, we have established, before it used to be very difficult. I mean, there weren't correspondents who are established here. They were relying on a few correspondents working, I think, for most of the media houses. But now with the new road coming in, with, this infrastructure being developed, I think the region also has had journalists based here. Most of the larger media houses have representations here, but still the problem of covering the conflict in the larger northern Kenya persists. Either the conflict is painted as timeless, as a routine, as cultural, as resource-based, and this misses the nuances that are there deeply within the conflict. So we've seen the political class blaming the media most of the time, and it's twofold really, because the media seems to be singing the tune of the politicians who are in power now, and at a different time when they fall out of favor, they are blamed. So we've seen a lot of media players, media personalities in the region, these correspondents, being kicked out of here through serious lobbying at the national level. I mean, some of the content being published about this conflict is really mind-baffling and unrealistic. I mean, events that are unrelated are being linked together and it's being published. I mean, community, the number of communities here sometimes being muddled with, funny names. So all this shows a level of unseriousness. When you raise this with the media, they keep saying, we don't have resources, we don't have people there. This is a vast region. So all these blames are there. So the media has become a tool of projecting power and bias or grievance also. So whoever is managing this perception creation in this conflict is the person who is really part of the problem also. So this is where the media is. I think they need to look at the conflict serious, because I think the stories they tell has serious human consequence, and it's not just a drama, a political drama that is playing out without any consequences.
If you look at the region outside the mountain part of Sakuu, this is a predominantly pastoralist communities with, now not enough rain and pasture. How has this conflict then made the conditions really hard?
A lot of the pasture land that were used as reserve during famine and droughts are no longer in use. If you go to most of these areas, I mean, it's armed. You see people with guns rather than livestock and herders with their sticks. So this has affected, like transhumance and livestock survival mechanisms has completely been disrupted. But also in another way, the conflict has made questions of accountability and how resources that are supposed to be channeled towards famine relief, no one is asking or raising questions like that, because in a time of war, people are concerned with other things. I mean, they're not asking how much money was allocated to famine and drought and, tracking water, for example. So this accountability element is really also lacking. Also, I think generally a hungry population, I mean, like the drought is really causing a big problem. A lot of livestock have died, but also the cattle rustling. This is, you see the number of cattle rustling increasing around when it rains, around the rainfall seasons. So the impoverishment of pastoralists is really, bringing the ravages of the drought to the fore.
No, thank you so much, Dalle. I think we'll leave it at that for today. We'll come back again, maybe on this issue or another issue. Thank you so much for listening, and have a nice day.
For this and other elephant conversations, follow The Elephant on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter at The Elephant. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to The Elephant, also on our YouTube channel by clicking on the link below.